Welcome to our latest roundtable. My name is Ann Vasquez, the CEO of EdSource. California school districts this past year made little progress overall in reversing the steep declines in test scores since the start of the pandemic in 2020. We know that the test scores are but one measure. There's much more that goes into learning and engagement beyond how students perform on a standardized test. But California students are struggling. More than half can't read and write at grade level, and nearly 2/3 fell short in math. At today's roundtable, we'll talk about how some districts in California are helping students. We'll also talk with experts about the challenging road ahead. EdSource would like to thank the Gates Foundation for making today's roundtable possible. Now for our introductions. First, I'd like to welcome to our panel Heather Huff, Executive Director of PACE, Policy Analysis for California Education. Welcome, Heather. Please also welcome Yoli Flores, President and CEO of Family in Schools. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Malloy, Superintendent of San Ramon Valley Unified. I'd also like to give a special welcome to Beto Hernandez, Elementary School Principal in Madera Unified. Please also welcome Chris Collins, Data and Assessment Coordinator in Cajon Valley Union School District. Our moderator today is our EdSource Editor-at-Large, John Fensterwell. John, I pass the mic on to you.
Thank you, Ann. So today, re-energizing education, it's a huge topic. And mindful of the past, we'll talk a little bit about some of the enduring impacts of COVID, but mainly we'll look ahead. We have 5 panelists with distinct perspectives whose work should interest and may inspire you. So Heather, let's start off with you, Heather Huff, Executive Director of PACE. Frame the challenges of where we are at this moment today.
Thanks so much, John. Anne mentioned the test scores, and the test scores are such a visible part of the challenge, but I really want to paint what a complex picture it is in many schools and districts across the state, because the activity of teaching and learning has just become much harder after the pandemic for a variety of reasons. We all know that students returned back to school in 2021 after a year plus of distance learning, and they brought back with them a lot of challenges that continue today. We know that COVID-19 and related school disruptions were hard on all students, but have been particularly hard on students of color, students from low-income families, English learners, youth in foster care, students experiencing housing insecurity, those with disabilities, and otherwise marginalized children and youth. We know that students coming back after those disruptions were very far behind prior cohorts, and they remain far behind. So between 2019 and 2022, test scores dropped precipitously. And what we're seeing between 2022 and 2023 is very little change. ELA scores went down just a little, and math scores went up just a little. But overall, students now remain very far behind in both subjects, students from before the pandemic. And part of what's most concerning about this is the opportunity gaps that are revealed in these scores. So for example, we know that 16.9% of our Black students and 22.7% of our Hispanic Latino students met or exceeded standards in math, compared to 49% of white students. So these are really big differences in student groups. But what's making it difficult to address this is that students came back not just with some of this delayed learning, but they lost a lot of opportunities for socialization, which has led to different kinds of behavior in school that make readiness to learn more difficult. We know that student mental health is suffering. We know that student enrollment is down, and that absenteeism is very, very high in many of our schools. So teachers have been tasked with the job of accelerating learning, but they're facing much more difficult student needs, and maybe in some cases, students who aren't in school. And we have a lot of open positions in many districts that have been difficult to fill, positions for paraprofessionals, support providers, which just means that we're asking our teachers and our educators to do a lot more in this post-pandemic period, and students need a lot more. So I think what I'm really eager to talk about today is not just strategies for improving teaching and learning, but also how we improve the systems in which our educators are working and the conditions for learning in schools and districts across the state.
There's been lots of money in the system in the past couple of years, mainly in one-time money, and the state has funded huge initiatives, really big initiatives: universal kindergarten, expanded learning opportunity grant program, which is $4 billion, community schools. And so Heather, will they position us to excel, for students to excel? And how's the state handling the rollout in relation to instruction and teaching and learning?
There's been huge investments in many areas where we know we needed huge investments. These areas that you mentioned, and those in TK for transitional kindergarten, universal preschool, expanded learning, community schools. These are all things that absolutely have an evidence base and can improve the learning outcomes for students long term. I think the challenge that many of the partners we work with within districts, and I'd love for my colleagues on the line to talk about that as well, but is there's so many different initiatives that districts are being tasked with building and creating without necessarily clear guidance for how to do that or strong coherence and alignment in those various programs. And since the basic challenge of teaching and learning and staffing classrooms and getting kids into school is such a dominant focus, some of these longer term initiatives aren't responding to the challenge that's in front of educators right now.
You mentioned it's a difficult time for teachers, and many of whom are not feeling appreciated. And I'm wondering, panelists, from your perspective, particularly, John, why don't you start off? What's your take on it as a superintendent?
Well, I think that the challenges that COVID and the post-COVID time have taught us is that the adults were impacted as well. And our staff is communicating to us that they are feeling that sense of stress and being overwhelmed. Our parents, our community, approach us sometimes with an impatience, which is sometimes justifiable, but sometimes challenging, because they want to see positive change and they want to see all of our kids doing well. And so we've been thinking a lot about that in our district, and I'm sure many of my colleagues across the state would be the same, that our staff needs the best conditions and the best supports in order to focus on what our students need. And to that end, that's where the systemic pieces come in. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about what does it mean to provide effective learning opportunities for our staff? How do we monitor student progress continuously, not just at the end of the year or the beginning of the next year when we receive CASP data, for example? We started this conversation by saying CASP data is an absolutely important data set amongst other data sets as well. And how are we helping our staff to lean in there? But I think that the whole concept of what has happened from a social emotional perspective, all of us, can't be ignored if we're going to improve our students' learning outcomes. And one symptom of that even is to think about the absenteeism that we are all addressing and trying to lean in to find out what are the reasons for that. It may mean that kids are disconnected to school. It may mean social emotional challenges. It may mean that we're just not providing the right programs in the right ways that are engaging some of our kids, and it could mean all of the above. So I would say, John, that we are in a position right now of really doing a lot of deep analysis and fact-finding so that the strategies we put into place are actually valid and effective for the problems we're trying to solve. Because to your point, we can only do so much. And if we're trying to do too many things, we won't improve anything. And so trying to find that legitimate focus based upon what our kids need in the most precise way possible, I think, is the key work as we head forward.
Thank you. Beto, we're going to be exploring your very distinct teacher collaboration in Madera and your school. But as a principal, talk about how you're dealing with teachers and the stress that they're under.
Good afternoon, everyone. And absolutely, I agree. We are experiencing feelings of being overwhelmed at the school level, and there are definitely a lot of initiatives that we care about and we know are good for kids. And so the unique position that we're in here in Madera is that we're collaborating with and learning with Solution Tree and implementing the PLC at Work process. And through that process, it's really shifted leadership's perspective as to how we shield all of our adults from having too much on their plate, and really looking at narrowing the focus of what are our initiatives. But first and foremost, they have to come to work to a safe and supportive environment. We have to. You mentioned earlier systems and conditions for learning, Mr. Malloy or Dr. Malloy. So I completely agree with that, because our teachers and students have to feel safe and supported here at the school every day. And so we've worked really hard at making sure that we have the systems in place and the expectations, the high expectations for all of our adults on campus to connect with kids on a daily basis, and also develop a school culture and climate where the adults feel supported by leadership and by each other. And so where we have narrowed our focus is specifically with Tier 1 universal supports, a framework for a safe and positive environment. And so through positive behavioral interventions and support, and really focusing on teaching students how to behave. And so we implement alternative discipline and have now suspended a single student for 3 school years at our school, TK6. And so, yeah, it starts with that.
You grew up in Madera and you went to its schools. And in fact, I think you've been a principal a decade, right?
This is my 10th year here. I actually grew up in a town nearby called Kerman in San Joaquin in the valley, west side of the valley. And so we implement alternative discipline, PBIS, that's part of PBIS, and restorative justice. And we have an amazing team of counselors and teachers and administrators that all work together. The entire school works together to make sure our students learn how to behave. And when they don't know how to behave, we really take it seriously when we say we're going to teach them how to behave. And so we've established that, and now we're narrowing the focus of really understanding at every grade level what it is we want our students to learn. And that's the foundation of everything we do.
You mentioned when we talked something that it's your students have struggled, as of others in the state. But it was interesting that you mentioned to me that it was only till recently that many of your students stopped wearing masks. And I was surprised to hear that, because what did that say? I mean, what did you take away from that?
Well, there was a lot of fear in our community of getting sick and not being able to come to school. That was a legitimate fear. When we came back to school and everyone was wearing masks and we had plastic barriers, and we were going into classrooms and teams of people were measuring 6 feet we're measuring 6 feet and who was sitting near the student who had COVID, and sending classrooms home, almost entire classrooms home, or half the classroom was going home. It created a lot of fear. And so when things got better and the majority of kids stopped wearing masks, we had a lot of students continue wearing masks. And so we saw the effect of trauma and isolation become very real at school. And so we have an amazing counselor. And like I said, we have this expectation on campus that our job is to develop strong relationships. Our calling, our moral imperative is our strong relationships with kids and with each other, so that our students, even though they might be wearing a mask, we see them, we hear them, and they connect with an adult every day.
Sorry, muted myself. Yoli, as CEO of Families in Schools, Coming out of the pandemic, there have been surveys showing that there's a disconnect between how students are performing on our markers of progress like Smarter Balance and the National Assessment for Educational Progress, and then the reports cards they're getting in school and the messages perhaps they're taking from you're getting at home. And what needs to change in terms of either its messaging or what can parents do to sort of really find out how their kids are doing in school? And have you found that disconnect too? Is that what you're hearing?
It's a very big disconnect. Every year learning, by the way, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you all. Every year Learning Heroes surveys families around the country and asks how they think their kids are doing. And 92% of families say that their kids are on track for reading and math. And the furthest thing can be true for so many, the majority, especially of low-income Black, Brown, English learner families. And so they're not getting accurate information or they don't always know how to interpret the data. There's confusion between what they see from the state. There's confusion from the report cards that generally say that their kids are getting A's and B's, and yet they're not reading at grade level. So what needs to happen is much more clarity and targeted information to families that they can understand of specifically how their children are doing. But that's sort of across the board for what families need. They just need better information. Most families have no idea what their child's reading curriculum is. They don't know what they should be looking for when they maybe visit a classroom. They don't know what effective instruction looks like. So we've done a very poor job in this country. So not just in California, not just in Los Angeles, where I'm from, of not engaging parents as equal partners in the education of their children. And 50 years of research tells us that authentic, clear family engagement is a strong strategy for student success. TNTP and Learning Heroes just did a study. We're going to post it on the link in the chat that looks at this is in Chicago, in Illinois, that looked at schools pre-pandemic and how they were doing on chronic absence, ELA, and math, and the level of family engagement for those schools, and then post-pandemic. And the findings are pretty dramatic. Those schools that had strong family engagement, provided accurate information, saw parents as equal partners, did much better on attendance, on ELA, and in math. So we've got a long way to go for schools to align much better with parents.
Now, you just started a literacy initiative, and is part of that connected to your desire to or recognition that parents need tools to ask these kinds of questions? They just can't go in and, one thing to say, what's our textbook in school, but to understand what the significance of that is and will you be working with parents to try and sort of bring them up to speed as to what good reading is.
Yeah, just last night we launched Read LA. So it will be a district-wide, citywide, actually multiple cities, because in LA Unified, there are multiple cities that are served. But we launched this early literacy campaign really to call attention, more public attention to the fact that most kids, if you're low income, Black, Brown, actually all kids, only half can read at grade level by third grade. And the majority of people just don't know that. And more importantly, we don't understand that it's not just the school's responsibility to make sure that kids are reading at grade level, because literacy starts at birth. And it requires all of us, parents, early childhood educators, regular K-12 educators, cities, counties, nonprofits, media, philanthropy. If we really want to end the literacy crisis in this country, we all have to step up. And so that's really the goal of the campaign in LA.
I wanted to jump in since we were talking literacy, John. We did have a few questions from the audience regarding what they can do to help improve literacy in their communities. And quite a few of these questions are coming from retired teachers themselves, So is there a way to tap into the retired teachers in the communities to help on these specific initiatives?
Yeah, I'll jump in and then my colleagues can also add. But yes, that's the whole idea behind our campaign, is really bringing everyone in, including retired teachers and others. We know that tutoring, for example, is a very important and effective strategy to help kids catch up. But we don't have enough tutors. So those individuals who've been teachers want to come back and support students, can support that process through being a volunteer tutor at their local school district. So that's just one way. And we know that there's also other ways that teachers can support kids through the community school movement, through after school programming, through support in math and literacy. So lots of ways. We just need to reach out.
Heather, I know you've looked into the issue of tutoring particularly, and certainly retired teachers would one option. But has California missed the opportunity to really get involved in organizing and perhaps funding tutoring in the ways that states like Tennessee have done? I mean, we may have missed that chance initially, but certainly the need for it will persist into the future.
I think it's never too late to build an initiative or a structure to bring qualified people in to help our students. We have retired teachers, we have college students, we have parents, we have many people in communities who want to help. And I think what we have to build in the systems is ways to get those people into our schools and helping, volunteer opportunities, mechanisms to accelerate the process for being a cleared volunteer. This is something that we often hear can be a barrier to participating in schools. And we have to make sure that the structures that are built for their volunteering are effective. So on tutoring, for example, we know that just putting people into schools is not effective for them to sit down and work with a student, given what a person might think a student needs. What makes tutoring effective is that those tutors are trained, that they're being asked to do things that are aligned with the instructional strategies that the teacher is using, so that that's enforcing what they're learning in school, reinforcing what they're learning in school. So it's not just about getting those people, although that's the first start. It's also about making sure that they're being integrated into a coherent learning system within a school. And that's when we see the real benefit of tutoring.
John and Chris, one of the questions that was asked, I know interests both of you, is why are measures outside of the traditional metrics, grades and AP scores, important, and how do you convince parents and others of their importance? Now, I know both of this issue is foremost in both of your minds. And Chris, why don't you start off, talk about what you're doing in Cajon Valley with regard to expanding that definition of success and trying to build a larger definition of what learning is.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's an honor to be here with all of our panelists this afternoon and learn together. We know, and it's been highlighted so far in the panel, that test scores tell just one part of the story, and it's often an incomplete part of the story that we're seeing. Dr. Malloy highlighted it very well, that our teachers, our families, and our students are all operating on feedback loops that quite often emphasize just the test scores alone. In Cajon Valley, we are blessed to serve one of the largest Middle Eastern refugee populations in the country. And we have many newcomers coming into our district who might be scoring below basic on their standardized testing, but by the end of their first year are up on the big stage giving TED Talks at our annual TEDx Kids at El Cajon event. That was a real aha for us when we saw the rapid progress that our students were making. And in Cajon Valley, our vision is happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. So right now, through generous funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and Walton Family Foundation and SERPI, we are working to create a portrait of a graduate to holistically measure skills that are needed to be happy, healthy, and gainfully employed. We've been conducting focus groups with community members, with families around what are the skills and mindsets that every Cajon Valley graduate needs in order to thrive in the world of work. And everybody is describing these skills that are needed to be happy, healthy, and gainfully employed. And really, it's in service to everybody in the ecosystem to have these feedback loops so that way progress can be monitored more effectively and more efficiently.
Part of it is how you measure engagement. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
And I'll just jump in and start with a very important story that I was taught last year by some of my high school students when I was doing some student voice circles. And this one young person said, "I've been taught to take tests, but I'm not sure I know how to learn." And that statement has stuck with us, and I've used it everywhere I go. So our shift here in the San Ramon Valley Unified School District and our vision statement is we're broadening the definition of success on the foundation of academic excellence so all kids can thrive. Academic excellence is important. Our kids have to read. Our kids have to be able to communicate in all different forms effectively. Our kids have to be able to do math. And we want to ensure that that is still front of mind. And if kids are thriving, it means that they are true independent learners when they graduate from us. They have a confidence in their ability to think and to create. They have the skills, which are oftentimes back into that social emotional frame, to be on teams, to communicate effectively. And to that end, we too have created a learner profile that's driving the learning experiences that we have for our kids in our district. So for us, it's a both and. We want our kids to do well on CASP. We want to do better than we have because we know that that gives us important information. And we want to measure that our kids are able to do all the things that I've just said in terms of thriving. One other point is that when we talk about how rapidly the world is changing, and when we think about, for example, and we are here in my district, and I'm sure districts all across the state, understanding artificial intelligence, for example, and what impact that might have, not only in terms of how learning will change, how schools will change, but also how students can be supported to learn. Because obviously there are new and emerging technologies that could help even in different forms of tutoring, for example, that we're starting to study. So where I'm going here, John, is that I think we have to be sure that we are providing those foundational learning experiences, figuring out where the gaps are in systemic ways, providing those strategic supports, and thinking ahead, because our kids need that type of support as well.
Yoli.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on Dr. Malloy, your point, so well taken. And I want to remind us that for learning to happen, so I'm going to take a step back, for learning to happen, and I come at this as a social worker and as somebody who knows almost nothing about the neuroscience, but I know a little bit about the limbic brain. Kids need to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of being valued and cared about. And I think this is a little bit about what I hope community schools models are trying to get at, those kinds of social emotional supports. But I don't see as much of a focus on that side of the learning. And I wonder if it's because we still don't really understand how children learn and what sparks that fire to want to learn, not just memorize. And so wondering what your experience has been around that feeling a sense of belonging and cared for, and that people are valued, that these children are valued.
Anyone want to jump in on it?
I'll just say really briefly that on our dashboard that we are held to account for our kids' sense of belonging that we measure through California Healthy Kids, but we've also worked on a partnership with UC Berkeley to have a screener that allows us to do that more regularly. And we're now piloting another diagnostics tool where teachers can get immediate feedback for themselves in their own classroom called PERTS Elevate that speaks specifically to the concept of belonging. So I would say that at least in our district right now, and I would speak for many of my colleagues who I connect with, they would say too, that concept of belonging has become front of mind, especially after the COVID dynamics that have so much impacted us.
Chris, part of that sense of belonging is sort of belonging into a larger community. And you go at great lengths in all classes, starting early, to have people come from the community and talk about what they do. And it's and you take students to Qualcomm, I think in San Diego, even in middle school, and a sense of bringing the community to you and then taking your students out. That's a very conscious effort on your part, and it's in the system, right? Talk a little bit about that, if you will.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Yoli, I love that you brought up the necessary conditions for learning. Belonging, yes, absolutely. We're measuring belonging through Gallup student polls, and through our World of Work initiative, we have also empowered our teachers to be career developers within their classrooms. So through our Mission of Me framework, we equip all students to learn about their unique strengths, interests, and values. And we anchor in interests in the common language of RIASEC, because it's the link to see who I am as an individual and where I might fit out in the world of work. We also work to expose students to career opportunities right from within the region of San Diego and El Cajon by bringing them into the classroom to be meet-a-pros and tell about their job and why they love their job. And that really speaks to the power of the RIASEC, because the understanding of self allows students to connect with these professionals who come into the classroom. And that really is a part of the necessary conditions for learning. So that way we can continue to focus on reading and math and making sure that students have those world of work skills down and also have a conception of self.
Could you explain that acronym for those who don't know it?
Yeah, thank you, John. RIASEC is an interest framework. It's 6 letters that stand for 6 different interest themes, and every person and every job is a combination of 2 or 3 of these themes. It's used by our government's database of jobs to classify jobs, and it's being used by major universities to start to classify majors. So it's really a language that can be spoken from K to gray to understand interests. And we know from longitudinal research that interest fit has the highest correlation to job performance, success, and income. So if we know what we like to do and we know where we fit in the world of work, we're going to be happier and more productive in the long run because of it.
Beto, you have your hand.
Yes, with regards to belonging, at our school, we're very intentional, like I said before, about relationships with students and culturally relevant practices. Our students feel like they belong because we're very intentional to make sure that they feel connected to adults every day. And that's where it starts. The moment our students enter our school, they're greeted with a smile and they feel welcomed. Before they walk into classroom, every single teacher, every single adult is welcoming them with a greeting that they choose with the teacher, and they make a connection before they walk into the classroom. We feed all of our students breakfast in the classroom. Our teachers open their doors at the beginning of their duty day, and they eat a breakfast in every single classroom, and the teachers facilitate that. We have specific relationship building activities that we coach and prepare our teachers with prior to the school year starting, and we integrate culturally relevant practices so that our students, our cultures and native languages are also celebrated. So we do the research on the best practices for students feeling like they belong and that they're seen, and making sure that we are culturally relevant in our classroom with different activities such as reciting a student creed. School-wide every morning, our students recite a student creed with positive affirmations in English and Spanish, and they start the day not only with a greeting at the door with the teacher, but also with positive affirmations about themselves. I am loved, I am valued, I matter, along the lines of that. There's a question there about what are the attitudes of administrators regarding students who live in homes where parents are working day and night just to provide shelter and food. Our community is the epitome of that. We live in a high poverty community. We work in a high poverty community. And so we do all of our efforts to get parents involved who work from sunrise to sunset and even beyond that, and working on weekends. And so we understand that it's challenging for a lot of our parents to volunteer or to be involved when they're trying to put food on the table and a roof over their head. And so our mindset has to be that regardless of parent involvement, it's our responsibility during the school day to ensure high levels of learning. And so we own the learning of our students at the school level in the classroom, and we focus on what we can control. And so what we can control are our attitudes about our students and believing that they all can learn regardless of their circumstances. And so we have adopted that mindset, and we are highly focused on what is it we need to do with our students in our classrooms, in our school, regardless of parent involvement. It's nice when parents are involved, but in a community like ours, we're not depending on that for student success. We communicate, we involve them, we invite them, and we do events like a calenda, of traditional celebration in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. And we had great parent involvement after hours. But during the school day, it's on us.
How did you have a chance to talk about your teacher collaboration, which is special? You alluded to it earlier, because that's part of what you do to create a community. Is teachers actually work with students in other classes during times of the week, and that's part of your professional learning community. I wonder if you could make that connection for me, because before the pandemic, it seemed everyone had a professional learning community, and the pandemic may have broken some of that continuity with so many absences and other problems. And you've come back strong, and perhaps what I can tell, and I think one of the links we'll have is a podcast that was done about your program. Just talk about why it's so important to teachers and how that extends to relationships to students outside of that individual classroom.
And I shared a PDF that outlines our work with the PLC at Work process. We're in year 2 of 3 right now with the intensive assistance model, and we are very focused on going from PLC Lite to PLC at Work with Fidelity. And it is a heavy lift for all involved. It is very intense work. And so we are going into response to instruction or intervention in year 2, really refining how we approach intervention and making sure that all students are learning at high levels. And so we're in the process right now of shifting to this mindset that our students in a particular grade level, they're all our students. So if there are 4 teachers in a grade level, they're responsible for the learning of all the students, not just the students in their own classroom. And so they have collaborative time during the school day, 200 minutes available during each week to collaborate while students are attending special or elective classes. And so they're very focused on making sure that we are narrowing down the essential standards that students need to learn in math and reading, and using data to inform instruction. We are building a collaborative culture that is very focused on a results orientation and learning. And so we are using data to inform instruction and intervention. And so we are taking student learning very seriously, and we're owning it together in a collaborative structure.
So
John,
go
ahead,
John. My understanding is that, just to illustrate a little bit more, that if students perhaps have been absent for a number of days in a number of classes, that those students would be gathered with one teacher who works with them. One of those 4 teachers will work with them on that very specific issue, or perhaps they're behind in an aspect of math, that that you have time built in for that, which I think is very unusual.
Yes, we built in intervention blocks, 30 minutes a day for teachers to use, and use data to inform small group instruction. And so if they give a common formative assessment that the whole grade level took on a particular day, let's say it was on subtraction, and they see that 30 students, 25, 30 students are still needing to fill some skill gaps, then the goal is that they'll one or two teachers will take those students during the school day and provide them with targeted intervention to regarding the skills they still need to develop to subtract at a high level, for example. And so we're relying on during the school day intervention. Our students at the end of the school day are very, very tired and spent, and we understand that the best learning time is going to be during the school day. So we're focusing all of our efforts on creating systems that allow our teachers and equip them to provide that intervention during the school day.
Ron, can I jump in and just make a connection? So PACE has been working with CCE and with Madera and a number of other districts who are working on this intensive assistance model. And it's really exciting because it centers the learning of every child in a school-based system and empowers educators to be able to serve them by working together. And I think, Beto, you've just done such a great job of describing it. I wanted to draw a connection to this idea of belonging too, because we talk about how students need to be seen and their identities need to be acknowledged and they need to feel like they have ways to be included in all of their identities. But part of that belonging is also students belonging as a learner. And the more that we can make the learning opportunities that students have feel in reach, right? We give them opportunities to be successful in their learning. That has a really additive effect, because if you as a student say, I don't get this and I'll never get this, that snowballs really quickly. And we see that, there's a really important transition that happens even in third grade. We know from decades of research that if students can't read by third grade, they have a read at grade level. They have a hard time accessing instructional content. They have a hard time engaging in class projects and participating in presentations. So if we can disrupt that cycle, get the students the skills that they need, help them feel that empowerment of learning and being able to be successful, that is really powerful for them to be able to achieve as they move through the grades.
Heather, I did want to jump in. We've had a couple of questions in the audience. So there's one that I think is a technical question. When we talk about post-pandemic, what are we talking about, since COVID continues to impact districts in different ways?
That's a really good point. I mean, I think a better way to talk about it is in the wake of the pandemic, right? There was this disruptive result of the pandemic where schools closed and we were dealing with the emergency. I think everybody can agree now we're not dealing with the health emergency of the pandemic in the same way that we were. Now we're dealing with what I think will be a very long tail of ripples from that initial emergency.
And when we talk older students, we're talking at the secondary level, what are some of the things, and this is open to the whole panel, that you're saying that can help motivate those students, especially when we talk about, we look at testing, we look at the secondary level, we look at, how are their needs going to be met, right? Considering all the challenges that they've been facing over the last few years.
I'll jump in on that first and then turn it over to John and Chris, because they've both hinted at this. As students get older, the agency for their learning falls more to them. They're making choices every day about how to engage with their schoolwork, about whether or not to come to school. And a big part of the decision that they're making is, how does this fit into the future that I envision for myself? Am I getting the right kinds of training for my college or career goals or the life that I want to live. And so really structuring those student experiences in ways that give them a sense of value and purpose is critically important.
And I'll add that when we look at our data as kids get older, unfortunately, they actually grow less connected to school. And then when we look at some of the rationale for that, we then realize that some of our kids are disconnected from their learning because they've got some learning gaps, especially when we talk about this post-COVID time. And so, for example, I'm a high school English teacher. I learned how to teach reading after I was a high school English teacher. That wasn't something we were taught how to do, but we have some kids who are coming into high school with those gaps. And so we're trying to figure out how to lean in there. Other kids are disconnected because they actually want to learn differently, and we're not giving them that opportunity. So it's the system that needs to shift in that particular situation. But I do think the most important piece is for us to know each and every student, understand their strengths and interests. We always talk about needs, which is very important, but why don't we talk about their strengths, interests, and passions and needs, and then figure out if we're actually doing that? And that's where I think the whole concept of what needs to change in terms of instruction is important, because too often school can still look like what it did when many of us were in school. And truthfully, because all of us have gone to school, we might actually hold on to that image of school as being the way it should be. And yet what we know is when kids are actually able to take that ownership that we've spoken about, they're going to learn better. But if our actual contexts, learning opportunities, and learning environments do the opposite of that, and I'll be honest, during the COVID time, when we went into that hybrid, when half of our kids were in and half of our kids were home, we learned a very difficult lesson that our kids only did well when an adult was driving their learning, and we're even talking high school. So that's been part of what's driven our broadening the definition of success, because if our kids aren't graduating with that sense of independence and confidence and purpose, as well as doing well in terms of our testing, as well as doing well in terms of other forms of success, if we're not providing that, then I would suggest that we're not doing what's expected.
Well, John,
Dr. Malloy,
go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate those remarks and would add, grounding learning in relevance is very powerful for students as well. At our local high school, Bostonia Global, all of the students leave for internships and mentorships on Tuesdays and Thursdays, many of them hosted by our local school district office here, the central office. And I had a former math student come up to me and say, Mr. Collins, you wouldn't believe it. I'm interning in the accounting department, and today they taught me all about this software program that you would love called Microsoft Excel. It helps us do the math, and it's that relevance that helps students see this is why I'm at school and this is why the learning matters, because it connects to my future possible self and it's useful for me in the world of work.
John, imagine you went to the state board, or if you have a friendly legislator who would say, look, give me flexibility I would like to create something really different outside of the 6-period day. What might it look like?
Thanks for that question, John. And I will say with real optimism that there are some of our leaders at the state who are asking these questions, and I have been able to offer this insight. Right now, we are funded in the state of California based upon instructional time. Instructional time usually means when kids are physically in their seats in their classroom. And for some, that is absolutely necessary for them to be successful. For others, that doesn't actually allow us to get into some of the concepts that Chris was referring to, which is relevance for some of our students means an entirely different context with entirely different learning strategies that at the present moment, our system doesn't necessarily recognize or fund. Without some other dynamics, which we might call independent study contracts and all the rest, which I'm not going to get into here, but leave it to say that the system is sometimes what holds us in place. Now, what I love about Cajon Valley, and I follow David and your work, Chris, very closely, is our job as leaders sometimes is to find the ways to kind of push that envelope within the legitimate circles. but sometimes we need the circle or the structure or the box or whatever image you'd like to shift as well. And I would say we're at a point in time now that, for example, talking about chronic absenteeism without looking at all the reasons that kids might not be at school might miss the whole issue. It might get part of it, but I oftentimes worry when I hear that discussion, we're not looking at all the reason kids might not be at school. We're looking at some of the ones that are most commonly talked about. So, John, I think it's time for us to revisit how we're structured, how we're funded in light of that structure, and how that structure might actually be keeping some of our kids from the learning and the experiences that they need.
Yeah, Yoli.
Yeah, again, just following Dr. Malloy on that point, we also need to understand from families what is happening that they are not sending especially the little kids. We know that there's a huge spike in kindergarten in chronic absenteeism, I think by 40%. So I'm investigating with Attendance Works and with another family-facing organization called PICE. We'll be doing focus groups around the state to really talk to parents about what is happening, especially in this initial important foundational setting grade that so many of their children are not in school every day.
You go back to Beto's work in George Washington Elementary, and Heather, you can answer this with Beto, and where I think it touches on other subjects, which is other possibilities, which is my understanding is Beto's got a grant from the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence to make this happen, and has a vendor solutions tree, which Beto mentioned. And you said this is not an inexpensive endeavor, and so I'm wondering, and because it requires training, intensive training, Beto went through it, and others would. Suppose you want to, how can you replicate? How can what should the state be doing to replicate the kinds of successes that we see in George Washington Elementary and Cajon Valley? And it's about, we're spreading the word, but I don't think a lot of people know that these successes are happening.
And I'll touch upon the issue of the chronic absenteeism as well. It's a very proud point that our school has one of the highest attendance rates year after year in Madera. And so, when you look at a school where we're in the community with the highest poverty rate in the county, and yet we have the highest attendance rate, even right now, we have the lowest percentage of chronic absenteeism. That says a lot about the climate and culture of the school. The kids want to come to school. And so we hear stories all the time that kids get their siblings ready as young as 10 years old. They're responsible for getting their siblings ready and getting to school. And they want to get here on time because they feel like they belong and they don't want to miss out. We have a variety of ways to promote positive attendance, but it always is going to come down to how do students feel about school, and do they want to come to school? And when the kindergartners start at that age, TK kinder first, start missing a lot of school, we have systems in place to motivate the students to want to come to school, and put that gentle pressure on parents very early on about the importance of attendance. And so being a dual language school and program, parents are required to come to an orientation about the program before they enroll their children in our school. And so part of that discussion with our parents is the importance of attendance. And so at every opportunity, we are promoting attendance. We have an amazing parent resource center as well in the district, and one housed here at our school that provides parent education courses in technology, language, attendance, educational vocabulary and programs. Part of that is ensuring that parents know the importance of attendance. And so we have a variety of strategies that we implement, but it starts with the culture of the school. And do kids feel safe, and do they want to come to school? And we Even though we have a lot of students that live in poverty, we have the lowest chronic absenteeism, and that is, I believe, as a result of the school's culture. Regarding the PLC project, the solution tree, the main idea has been be very clear about learning, be very clear about what results we want to get and the systems we want to implement. But the bigger picture is narrowing the focus and really focusing on teaching fewer essential standards to mastery. Too many times we've been guilty of that, trying to teach too much in one school year. And when you're talking about going through cycles of inquiry and looking at data to inform instruction, you really have to narrow the focus of how many essential standards you're trying to teach and respond to. So in a nutshell, is really narrowing the focus of what we're expecting teachers to do with math and reading, and coach them up so that their efficacy is developed at a high level.
And I'll pick up on that point, because the capacity and the culture to do what Beto is describing is very different from how a lot of or most schools are organized. The idea that teachers at the beginning of the year take stock of every student's learning as a team, determine what the most critical standards are and learning milestones that they need to hit, that they bring student work to every meeting and say, here's what I tried. I'm not sure if it worked. What did you try? And then going back and reteaching. That data analysis skill, that vulnerability and sharing of your own practice, that evaluation of other teachers' practice, that intervention work, that's not necessarily how schools are organized now. So making that shift requires a lot of support. And the initiative that the school is a part of is a hefty amount of coaching time in order to build those structures, to train everybody in the school on how to do things differently, to build new leadership structures within the school for collaborative problem solving and collaborative leadership. And those aren't easy shifts to make. So I think to your question about state level investments, we often in this state, we set goals for what we want to see, or what, something like, a framework. But really making big instructional shifts, making big structural or cultural shifts, those things don't happen without big investments in trying to build that capacity at the school level, at the district level, and all the way up to the state.
Yoli, one of the big investments is community schools. Are you hopeful that this will work for engaging parents on a big scale and actually involve working with teachers to actually make decisions in those schools, which is what community schools are intended to do? And we've just begun this movement of community schools, and we have a lot to learn in the next several years. I didn't know if you have any thoughts on where that fits in to parents.
Well, I'm thrilled that one of the pillars in the community schools framework is family and community engagement. And I think we are going to see the kind of impact that can have, especially if it's implemented with effective family engagement strategies. And that's probably a whole conversation in and of itself. But I am seeing some progress in Los Angeles, which has been a very early adopter of community schools, even before the state's investment in the community schools initiative. We're starting to see, it was just a report, I think Sandy already posted it in the chat, by GPSN, that looked at the impact so far of community schools in LA. And what we're seeing, middle school parents are finding that their schools provide a higher level of activities. Parents with high school students feel more included in decision making. 34% of schools see that there is transformation happening with supports, but also with family engagement. We've seen improved attendance up by 4%, reduced chronic absence by 8%. So I am hopeful, but we're not there yet. But I think we're on the right track.
And I have one last question, but I'll defer to you if you have any that you want to ask as the last question for the day.
Really, I think that just it's been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate all the different avenues that are possibilities for the students of California. Any last thoughts from anyone on the panel about what other administrators, other teachers out there listening right now, what's one concrete thing that they could do that you feel will make a difference?
That was my
I'll jump and say the most concrete strategy that's making the greatest impact is listening to our students, creating the conditions for them to share their voice, and their wisdom, whether it's kindergarten or 12th grade, is second to none.
And I would say for teacher leaders, teachers and administrators, having that mindset that we're chasing effective first instruction. If our instruction is effective and our students are engaged and having joy in relevant learning and project-based learning and learning activities, then they will start to do well and do better on external measures.
And I'll say that developing trusting relationships with families can take us a long way.
I would add investing in relationships and knowing every student and family deeply.
That is so excellent. And what I'll add from a systems perspective for administrators across the state is as we think about structures for supporting educators in schools, for supporting schools across districts, to really be thinking about that student-centeredness and how we organize our investments, our professional learning, everything around making sure that every single student is being taught and reaching the milestones that they need to for being able to thrive.
And that's a good note to end on. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today and participating and engaging in such an important conversation. Thank you, John, for your deft moderating. You're always a wonderful facilitator. And thanks again to the Gates Foundation for making this conversation and this roundtable possible.